Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Earlier this morning, you heard Joel talk about, as he kicked off the workshop, the importance of the ongoing streamlining activities that we have really at every EM site, and quite candidly, at every one of the DOE sites. Over the past few years, we in FCOG have been working probably for the last 3 or 4 years on those streamlining activities with our federal counterparts to determine how we can complete these missions ever more efficiently. When you think about the things we work on every day, certainly the environmental cleanup, but the national security mission of NNSA, the nonproliferation part, and then the enabling science that we have at all the national laboratories and the Office of Nuclear Energy with the really critical activities that they have underway at Idaho and elsewhere. The new administration, when they came in, of course, put an even greater emphasis on streamlining. So we've approached this with a strong commitment because we know that reducing risk and cleaning up the sites as quickly as possible is really good for everyone. First of all, it's certainly good for the communities, as you heard today, and the tremendous economic development that we can get as we free up land. And it's also important to NNSA and science and others to get additional footprint where they can do these critical missions in an existing institution. It's certainly good for the workers, both for our workers and for the new jobs that are created, and of course, at the end of the day, for the taxpayer. So today we're going to focus on the activities in Oak Ridge under the UCOR team, and they've really made impressive progress that we're going to hear about today in accelerating cleanup and the way it's done by these streamlining activities. And again, these didn't start with the new administration. They've been ongoing for several years. But let me start with kind of the principles that we developed both in FCOG and at our company we use on every one of these projects. So the first thing that we do, because it's really critical to say, well, what does streamlining mean? Well, the first thing is we identify risks, and we haven't always done that. Our culture is a compliance culture, as you know, working in under all the federal controls and federal orders. But we start with the risks in association with our federal counterparts to say, for this mission at this site, what are the unique risks that we need to eliminate, mitigate, or manage? And only then do we say, now, what requirements should we apply to eliminate those risks? They could be commercial requirements, they could be DOE orders, it could be a combination, like you've heard, of OSHA plus. And then after we've got the risks identified, like what are we doing here today? And what are the risks to our workers and to the community? Then we talk about the controls that we're going to put in place. And then third, we develop a set of metrics to measure those kind of, all right, now how do we know each day, each week, each month that we're effectively eliminating those risks? And what do we do next in that process? From the outset, the critical part of this, whether you call it transparency or just good communication or no surprises, is we decide how we're going to report progress. Because again, we generate a lot of paper that nobody reads, but it's very critical for our federal counterparts and all of our workers and everyone on the team that they know where we are, again, every day, every week before they go to plan work. So getting a clear reporting structure that works not only for our team, but for our federal partners and all the stakeholders and Congress is very, very important. And then periodically for us as contractors, it's on us. We're accountable for this work. We understand that when we undertake it, so we need to provide the independent overchecks periodically doing reviews. But one way of doing this very efficiently is to do them in cooperation with our federal peers so that we're doing fewer reviews, but very penetrating technical and programmatic reviews. And then finally, on a regular basis, we sit down and say, what worked, what didn't, and what's next, so that we've got a continuous feedback process so that what we're doing at Oak Ridge, we can share with each of the other sites, and what they're doing, they can share with us. So those are the steps. And now, if you talk about how you approach those steps, what's the result of that? What does streamlining mean? Well, if we do that right, and we start with risk, we're going to increase safety, we're going to increase security, we're going to increase quality, and we're going to save money and get the cleanup done a lot quicker. And that means engaging the workforce, because you think about the people that we bring in rather than saying, read this procedure and go do work. We're saying, here are the risks. Now, how do we mitigate that? What do you think is the best way of eliminating that risk so that we're engaging the workforce to work safely today and then ever more efficiently in the future? And it's not the compliance culture, and we need all of your help because we've had, you saw 75 years, almost all the states are celebrating 75. You're all getting all of these pins. We've had 20 or 30 years to learn how to be fully compliant. We're just learning how to be the performance-based culture that DOE was really founded on. We're putting a strong emphasis on taking unnecessary steps out of the process. So again, we need to engage the workforce. UCOR is certainly doing that. We need you to do that at all of your sites because once again, we've gotten into this risk thinking that multiple steps and multiple reviews reduce risks, and we know they don't. So doing one or two single reviews and then getting into the work because we're cleaning up hazards, and the longer those hazards are there, the higher the risk to the workers in the community. And then avoiding unnecessary delays, the other critical part, talk about this blocking and tackling. There's nothing scientific or amazing to the real core of this. You eliminate unnecessary work, and how do you make decisions? So with our federal counterpart, with Erik and his team, who can make a decision? What's the time frame for each decision? And then very importantly, when we disagree, how do we escalate and get a resolution? So as I said, our success is really underpinned by the strong partnership. And we're going to talk about that today, of how we've done that at Oak Ridge, what's working, and then hopefully some lessons learned that you can apply to your work. I'm really pleased and honored today to have a great panel from Oak Ridge, Joe Aylor, who is Director of Critical Projects for UCOR, Wade Creswell, who is the Roane County Executive and ECA Board member and our stakeholder partner in this endeavor, Tim McEvoy, the Vice President of Longenecker and the Director of Engineering for UCOR, and really one of the folks that's been working diligently for several years to bring the power of AI and digital tools, because we create these mountains of data, and what do we do with it? Well, the idea is let's use that to define the risks so that we're not fixing the problem, we're avoiding the problem. And of course, our federal partner who enables all of this, Erik Olds, manager of the Oak Ridge Environmental Management Office. So let's get started by, as we discussed above, because I'm going to ask Erik the fundamental question, which underpins all of this. Based on the guidance that we've gotten from the Secretary, the National Lab Directors Council has made some recommendations for improvement. The Secretary has signed out a letter. We've had some subsequent letters from the Deputy Secretary on giving us more delegation to the programs, to EM, to NNSA. So based on those letters and the streamlining actions of the other programs, Office of Nuclear Energy, NNSA, Erik, how are you approaching the efforts to increase efficiency in Oak Ridge? It's on, it's red, but where's the sound panel? Joe, share yours with them.
Mine's
Okay.
not,
Um,
mine is,
Yours is not. There we go.
There we go.
can you hear me?
Thank you.
Sorry.
I could understand doing that to Joe, but not to Erik. I
Yeah.
didn't want to turn Joe's mic off all the time, but
I promise I didn't pay.
Thank you, John. And good morning, everyone. I think I'll start off by saying, the times, they are changing. And Mark had to use his Rocky reference, so that was my Bob Dylan reference. Felt I had to use some sort of cultural reference this morning. And change isn't a bad thing. It's certainly a time of rapid change, and I think we're seeing a lot of opportunities, but I think in times of change is when we see the most growth and the most opportunity to really reframe and think about how we do our work in a different way. So first of all, at Oak Ridge, we're taking a very methodical and strategic approach to finding areas that don't increase risk, but could enable efficiencies that reduce cost or help accelerate schedule. And in our business, time is certainly money. And actually, we have another slide. If we could advance to the next slide, I think we had something that was going to be up. that shows Oak Ridge a little more broadly, or maybe not. So we'll stick with this one. But and I was going to say on that graphic, if you were looking at the graphic, our slogan is on there: clean up today for a nuclear tomorrow. And cleanup really is our core mission. You know, cleaning up, reducing liability, and managing waste. It really is more than just a slogan. It's more than just our wheelhouse. It's more than our mission even. It's really the yardstick by which we should measure what efficiencies and changes that we can really put in place. I mean, we're basically asking ourselves, what can we do differently, and where can these efficiencies really contribute to that core mission that is cleanup? At Y-12 and Oak Ridge National Laboratory, we're asking ourselves, can we get into facilities faster? And should we change the order in how we get into those facilities? At the west end of Oak Ridge, we're looking at completing the closure activities and transferring land sooner. And can we do some of those activities in a different way? Achieving our core mission faster and more efficiently and effectively really becomes the engine and the enabler of new commercial and federal missions all over Oak Ridge. And that's very important to our community, which I know Wade will talk about, and our federal partners at Oak Ridge. Second point, we're documenting, and this is a very important part, we're documenting clear and actionable programmatic approaches for improved efficiency. What does that mean? We're being very deliberate in our approach. Again, there's a lot of opportunity for a great deal of change very rapidly, and that's good. I love that we have those opportunities to look into our toolbox and decide what things we can do differently, faster, better. But we have to be very deliberate in our approach and what we choose to change and how we choose to change it. And so I think a little bit of what you'll hear today is how UCOR has gone through a very deliberate approach to look at areas like safety, environmental, capital asset acquisition, assurance, which we'll talk a lot about, and other areas, and be very deliberate in their approach. We want to ensure that our roadmap that we develop, given all of these opportunities, is very precise and is very clear to our team, so everybody knows the direction that we're heading. And most importantly, and John, you touched on this, that it's measurable. Are we going to see some changes right away, or do we need to continue to tailor our approach? Third and final point, we want to ensure that these changes can be maintained over time. That's sustained. Sustainable change is the best change, right? We want performance efficiencies that are repeatable and that are consistent over time and teachable, right? Someday, all of us won't be sitting here. Unfortunately, there's going to be other people sitting in these seats doing these jobs, and we want to make sure they can take advantage of the good things that we're putting in place. So we want to ensure that our teams that are in place really understand and are prepared to fully support the changed environment and perform.
All right, thank you. Maybe next we go, Joe, to you. And what are some of the efficiency initiatives that UCOR is pursuing? Just give us some examples of some of the things you're doing to accelerate the mission, if you would, please.
Yes, thanks, John. And if we can advance one more slide, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, there we go. So before I jump into what we're doing, Erik and John have made already a number of great points. It takes me back a little bit to my Lean Six Sigma days, right? When we're all doing process improvement projects and things of that nature. And the one thing I found when I was doing those, didn't matter what it was, if it was operational, if it was in waste, it was in construction, D&D, process improvements and things of that nature. It was never about, hey, work harder. That's never where you got the results from, right? It was always you got the biggest bang from your buck, for your buck, when you would reduce or eliminate certain requirements that may be overreaching and whatnot. And I think we all know, we've worked in this industry. I see many of you out there that I've worked with. We know how we get there with requirements sometimes, right? An event happened, an incident happened, maybe it's a bad project. And so we go through root cause analysis. We put in corrective actions, all meant to address the problem so it doesn't happen again, right? But what we find often is that there's a lot of unintended consequences that come from that and additional requirements requirements that cause delays in schedule, increase cost, maybe have a negative effect on safety or quality that you didn't really think about. And so as Erik pointed out, when we started looking at the orders and developing a plan, as Erik said, we wanted to make sure that we didn't come too far back, but that we identified things that would have very strong results that wouldn't get negative reactions from our workforce, because at the end of the day, we all know they're the ones on the tools doing the work each and every day, right? We can all agree on that. And so with this 5-point plan, working in concert with Erik and his federal colleagues, we developed 5 key things, as Erik mentioned. They start with, first of all, looking at an OSHA plus framework, right? NNSA is already doing that on a lot of their projects. 10 CFR 851 that gets flowed down through our contracts sometimes can be overly restrictive in areas like electrical work, fall protection, confined space, even to the extent where we get into buildings and the requirements we have for sampling and characterization. And so we're looking at areas like that that still meet all OSHA requirements for construction industry, but maybe are a little too restrictive, in our industry and on some of our contracts. The next thing is the capital line item 413.3B. Right now, I think NNSA and Science have both been given an increased threshold from 50 million to 300 million. There's a project currently in my portfolio that could probably benefit from some of that. As Erik mentioned, when we're doing a lot of the reports and developing a lot of the peer reviews and documents that have to go through a 413.3B process, it can be very cumbersome, not only on our side, but on Erik's team's side. And what have we seen recently? The administrative burden that Erik and his team have to deal with, and I know many of the federal partners that are out there across different sites, you've lost a lot of staff. And so anything you can do to reduce some of that burden saves weeks, saves months. And when we are talking about $100 million capital line item projects or $1 billion, that makes a huge difference. And as we all know, under this administration, we're under scrutiny to help reduce those costs so that we can put them back into the cleanup missions and accelerate the environmental liability reduction. The next thing is CERCLA lead agency authority. Are there opportunities where we can utilize time critical removal action? At Y12 right now, we're doing demo on the Alpha 2 facility. Rather than maybe waiting weeks or months or even years to get into the soils or the RA to turn that over to Y12, who has an enduring mission, could we use some of that time critical to accelerate that and hand the footprint back over to them a little faster? So those are things we're looking at. And then we're also looking to redefine and better align award fee and some of the PBI. Now, granted, that's largely administrative, but that's another one. And then I think the last one I'll say for Tim that he's going to talk about is going to a more cooperative audit strategy. We do so many audits. I know a lot of you get bombarded with audits. There's hundreds and thousands. You do the division there, and that means, dozens a week, dozens a month, hundreds a month that you have to do. And so we're looking at better partnering with the federal client to approach that.
Thanks, John. I'm glad you mentioned OSHA Plus, because another thing that we're focusing on when you use risk-based, it's really good for the community, because all of the contractors, we're all used to working to commercial standards. I mean, small businesses, but they're not used to working to DOE orders. And now everyone's building things. So if we want to get these folks to work for us, if we use what they're using in the private sector and then say, just add these few things to mitigate risk, they'll take on our work. If we throw all of the DOE orders at them, they just won't fit our work. And so this not only gives us more vendors to pick from to get the work done faster and cheaper, but it allows some of these companies we know in the communities to come in and start doing work at the site, because we know we're going to be doing work in Oak Ridge for decades, right? So we're kind of creating an opportunity for them and their workers really to kind of build a company in the local area. So Tim, what are the next steps in the Cooperative Mission Assurance Initiative? Because that's very critical. Is, okay, we got these metrics. How do we know that we're actually succeeding in eliminating risks and that our corrective actions are effective? what's the next steps and then what's the ultimate goal of the program overall?
Sure. So building off what Joe said a little bit ago, like in all these audits, like the whole system is designed to be somewhat inefficient, right? So we as contractors do our assessments and our assurance activities. Federal oversight comes in on top of that, and a lot of those are actually redundant. So the overall goal and objective is to collectively be not only more efficient and maintain like this level of confidence, but actually increase and strengthen the level of confidence. So that's the overall goal. So what we've done is partnered with our local DOE customer, and we have a cooperative assurance team that we've collaborated, gotten together. And our view collectively is that we are going to achieve that by inviting a federal customer into the process at a deeper level. So historically, sure, we share products of the processes. We share products like assessment schedules, assessment reports, and those kinds of things. And those all are very good, and they can give some level of confidence. Our collective view is there's far more confidence that we can achieve if they participate and directly observe the process. So that starts with the risk piece, right? So both John and Joe have talked about from the risk perspective. Slight side on that, our focus, as we all know, risk is a function of probability and consequence. Probability in our world, sometimes we have data, sometimes we don't. So we really focus on potential consequences, right? So we don't kind of get askew at arguing about probability. So what are those negative consequences, those potential high consequences that we want to avoid? And then we attack those. Once we have collective view of what that looks like, are we looking at the right things? Are we deploying our assurance resources in the right areas? Then we move into how we conduct them. So we engage in those discussions on the risks. Then we've already started about halfway through this year. We've started having our federal customers participate by observing our assessments, so they can get confidence, not only just by reading a report, but they can see how we develop lines of inquiry. Did we interrogate the process with rigor? Are we really objective? Are we self-critical in how we look at ourselves? So that provides much more full and complete understanding of where are we in our contractor assurance process. Those then lead to federal customers not having to do their assessments because they've already looked at the same thing with us, participated with us. So we can get rid of redundant assessments going forward. And then finally, how we address issues that we do find. Do we do, rigorous corrective actions? Causal analyses that result in corrective actions. So they participate all the way through the process and therefore have a greater level of confidence and then have to deploy less resources doing what effectively amounts to redundant assessments.
Thanks. And then kind of building on that, Joe, back to you, then what kind of savings or measurable results are you seeing and do you anticipate as you implement each of these key steps?
Yeah, so it's obviously very early in the process. I think there's a lot that's going to go into this, and like I mentioned earlier, when sometimes events happen and the pendulum swings too far the other way, we also want to be careful that we don't swing it back too far in the opposite way in which it started. But early estimates are showing savings specifically within our contract north of $100 million over the next several years. But the key takeaway there, again, I don't want to scare anybody. This isn't about jobs or losing people. This is money that we can sink back in to help accelerate cleanup. So in some of these administrative areas where we can reduce our G&A and our hotel costs and things of that nature, we're going to put this back into projects. But as of right now, John, I think, we're around 100 to 150 million based on early estimates. But I also see this as something that will probably snowball. When you do something good, you'll come up with new ideas. And so I see that number growing.
Thank you. And then, Wade, let's switch over to the other side from the community partner. What kind of efficiencies and innovations from a community perspective have you used to, as we free up this land to achieve the success that you've had, which is significant? I don't know how many billions that you told us yesterday that you've attracted in new nuclear. So how do you make that work?
Sure. Thank you, John. Really, it comes down to three parts. And I think you've seen a demonstration of that first part and just hearing the other table. I feel kind of removed from the other table. I'd like to come over and sit with you guys. but you I heard that demonstrated.
Yeah.
And that is, the Oak Ridge community is really strongly represented here in this room right now. And we wouldn't be had it not been for decades of a successful relationship between the local EM office in Oak Ridge and their long-term contractor, UCOR. The vision for what got us to where we are today was set long ago. Seth mentioned this morning, I was glad to hear him say, Gerald Boyd, who still acts as kind of the benevolent godfather to the stakeholders across the reservation. But he was one of the first to envision reuse of the reservation when we were just trying to get it off the ground, get the EM effort off the ground. And he had a long-term vision that helped get us to where we are today. Had it not been for decades of success, of a successful relationship between the local EM office and UCOR, this isn't happening today. The successes that we are celebrating now were completely dependent on that happening. Vision after vision after vision has led us to where we are today. So that's the first part, and we have to start with giving credit there. The second part is after decades of successful cleanup, the community began to realize the opportunity that lay before them, especially as we moved into this new nuclear era. We looked at each other across the reservation, and at one time, there were 17 different organizations across the Oak Ridge Reservation who had economic development as some part of their mission. But we began over time realizing the opportunity that laid before us. And once we realized that and gathered together stakeholders completely across the reservation and realized we're not as aligned as we needed to be, and that we wanted to be more aligned, that opportunity that had been created by successful cleanup for decades obviously was right there before us. And then the final piece that could not happen without those first two pieces taking place is that the community committed, stakeholders across the reservation committed to aligning around a nuclear identity. We could have gone many different directions. I remember having this conversation just 5-6 years ago with my boss at Oak Ridge National Lab. And there were plenty of opportunities around supercomputing, around composites, there's lots of different ways we could have gone. But because of what's happening in the nuclear era right now, it became very apparent the opportunities that presented themselves, like I said, because of the EM efforts. So that is now kind of our secret sauce, is the alignment across all stakeholders and relationships. This is my 4th workshop I've attended. And even the themes and I guess the focus of the workshops have changed, where we're talking about here, we need to partner, we need to collaborate, we need to, your partnerships. Well, now you're seeing the evidence of partnerships and collaboration, and that is exactly what we've done, is aligning around that identity and then committing to it. Now, here's the secret to that, is it just like everything else, relationships take work. You never, ever stop working at cultivating and maintaining those relationships. And it's hard work. It's not that we just all decided to align and then we all happily go this direction together. Every organization has its own focus, and we're all trying to complete our own mission, but we all have in common this identity that we pull together. We can achieve so much, and as what we're realizing now in our successes. So that alignment and the commitment to work through the ups and downs, the good and the bad times together, is exactly why we are realizing our successes that you mentioned. And what will continue to carry us in the forward is that commitment to continue to work together.
Thank you. And with that, I guess, building on that then, and go back to Erik, because, you've pulled this together, you've aligned the parties, you've established a relationship and the cooperative strategies, and they've really been foundational to your success. So going forward, how do you maintain that, sustain it, and even improve it, as you were saying, with all the stakeholders, with workers, with the companies, to expand that collaborative environment to, continuous improvement, get ever better as we go down this road?
Well, it's a lot like marriage. And Joe probably looks a little nervous. He's not sure what I'm going to say next, but I'll use my story. So when I got married 32 years ago this month, I assumed, maybe a little bit naively, that you just reach this point in your marriage where this that synchronicity occurs, you know, kind of when Harry met Sally sort of time in your life when you can complete each other's sentences and you know what each other is thinking. And you do reach that point in your marriage, but that's not the result of time. That is not just time spent together, because at the end of the day, you can spend time together with just about anybody. It's really the result of a lot of hard work, which Wade just talked a little bit about, and focus and communication and a commitment to build something together. And so I think a little bit about our relationship as partnerships with the community and with UCOR and ISOTEC and the other organizations that are involved as a little bit like a marriage, right? Our goals and our approach and what we want to accomplish is going to evolve over time. We as organizations will evolve over time, and we have to constantly recommit ourselves, if you will, to the relationship. And that means ensuring we are aligned on the vision. It means ensuring that we both have an equal voice in our thoughts and our actions. It means ensuring a lot of communication and that we're present when we're actually having communication with each other. And most importantly, and I'll say this, it's having the hard discussions when they're necessary. And I probably appreciate the hard discussions most. I don't covet the hard discussions. I know hard discussions are a hard thing to have because they're uncomfortable. But I think when you're having those difficult discussions and you're getting through the challenges that we're facing is when you're actually getting to the best alignment. So it's a very important part of the process as well. And the final thing I'll say is we need to celebrate our successes. I know we say that a lot. I know that's part of the reason that we're all here today, but we need to take time to recognize the good work that we're doing and celebrate those accomplishments together.
Well said. Wade, maybe go back to you then. What are your thoughts from a community perspective? Again, given that Oak Ridge has been at the center of energy development in Department of Energy and really in the country for decades, how do we expand this going forward? What can we do to make it better? What are your thoughts from a community perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is the question for our future, really. I was a part of a delegation, Mayor of Anderson County, and city officials, city manager Oak Ridge, a couple of economic development folks took a trip to Huntsville, Alabama, 2 or 3 months ago. And the point is we're on the front end of really having to scale workforce exponentially to meet the demands of what's coming our way. We wanted to visit communities who in our mind had successfully done that in the past. And Huntsville, and of course, Huntsville is a strong DOD community, not necessarily DOE community, but they had some lessons learned that we could share. And what we learned there, that it's going to be imperative for us to adopt somehow, some way, is that they were very fortunate to grow into the excess capacity and infrastructure that they had built in the 70s and 80s. So they were able to build out infrastructure to a vision for growth rather than building infrastructure just to meet the needs for a project. That's very difficult to achieve in today's time. But if we are going to meet the demands of a Manhattan Project 2.0 that this administration has laid out before us, we're going to have to find ways to invest in our communities and in surrounding areas, region really, to build towards a vision rather than build towards a project. It's the only way we're truly going to be able to capture not just the opportunities, but to meet the challenges in a way that I think will be effective in helping us win this race. If we don't do that, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to achieve that. So that's what we've got to focus on. Again, working with our partners. You know, another thing I want to say here too is our work with EM and UCOR. It isn't just they do the cleanup work and they hand off the property for us to run with. It is they are intimately involved in the visioning for our future, because we're going to have to be long-term partners no matter what. There's still a lot that's left to be done. So when it comes to trying to imagine and plan for infrastructure improvements that allow us to grow into, EM and UCOR's work is absolutely critical to that process. Even when we're recruiting projects now, both EM office and UCOR are very involved in helping us recruit. So there's a lot there to unpack, and we're still trying to really figure it out.
It's well said. You know, it's kind of interesting when you talk about having the vision, but then taking that approach of actually making something work. You think of our line item projects, and you can name WTP or UPF or any of the projects that we've built. That what WTP's been 30 years underway. And so one of the things that we're all talking about as contractors and FCOG is how do we do that incrementally? We know we have the mission, which is clean up waste or produce weapons or produce pits. And doing that incrementally where we get a capability in a couple years and then build on that rather than trying to do the whole thing where we have no capability for 30 years, it's just not good for any of us. So that idea, that creativity, I think that you're taking on the back end of that waste really does apply, and the same for the community. How do you get some capability right now, see what works for all the stakeholders, and then kind of build on it? So Joe, maybe go to you for the next steps. What's your vision of how we take this to the next level?
Well, we're obviously in the early phases, right? We're seeing a lot of ideas happening. I think we're seeing a lot of progress. We're seeing a lot of wins. We're seeing a lot of success. But this isn't something that's going to be ending anytime soon. As you pointed out, John, we've got decades of cleanup coming. The nuclear renaissance is happening right here in our backyard. Before I get into this, though, I want to give Wade a shout out. It doesn't matter if there's a big announcement from an Oklo, if it's a Kairos, if it's a Triso, an X-Energy, whoever it is, BWXT. Wade is always carrying the EM flag for us in Roane County and in East Tennessee. And so I really appreciate everything that he's doing. And what I want to go to now is an article that I saw in the Knoxville News Sentinel yesterday from Senator Lamar Alexander. And in that, you know, he talked about the progress. He talked about all the things that are happening in our backyard. But as Wade kind of alluded to, what Senator Alexander mentioned was this didn't just happen overnight. This has been decades in the making, all the way from the early cleanup ideas to the development of economic development corporations, many of which I see in the audience now. But then segueing also into people like Wade, who want to see the alignment. They want to see the growth. They want to work with partnering counties, with the city of Oak Ridge, with the Department of Energy, with UCOR, and move all together in the right direction. And that's what it's going to take, John. We can all have the vision. We all may think we know what it's going to look like. We all might have different ideas of how we feel like we should get there, but it's all working together, as Erik said, in this shared governance model, working on ideas, breaking through roadblocks to try to get there, because we are in the early phases and it's going to take more of that to continue to be successful. And so my short answer, though, there, John, is I think we need to continue to expand, bring in new partners, bring in new communities, because in Oak Ridge, I can say that's what it's going to take. There's not a lot of flat land in Oak Ridge to continue to bring in these companies. And so we're going to have to work with Knox County, with Middle Tennessee, with other parts of East Tennessee. And I think I saw that in Senator Alexander's remarks in the News Sentinel article as well, is he wants to broaden this and make it a much larger geography, John.
Thank you. So maybe as we kind of bring all this together, I'll go back to Erik and talk about, you know, what once was a vision is now a reality in Oak Ridge. And you think about this nuclear renaissance that we talk about all the time. The country needs power, no question about it. We have 50 to 75, depending on how you count them worldwide, different reactor concepts being worked on right now. But they need to be built, and then they need fuel. And if you look at the one thing that we don't have in this country is a way to provide the fuel for these reactors, particularly the new gas-cooled reactors and the sodium-cooled reactors. So you had a vision for how Oak Ridge and, of course, Idaho and other sites have the same idea of how do we enable that nuclear renaissance? So how do you share that tool and build on that for other sites? What would you recommend for other sites that are in the early stages of this? Because we're all going to go through it. Every site is going to play some role with industry as we give them the land. What are your thoughts you'd like to impart now from what you've learned and kind of what they might take and implement?
Well, I can approach this from the perspective of my time at Oak Ridge, which I came to Oak Ridge in February of last year. So I would still consider myself relatively new and learning the site and the community and the incredibly rich history that's there. I'm always fascinated when we talk about the nuclear renaissance and or even AI data centers. There's a term that's used a lot, Manhattan Project, the next Manhattan Project 2.0. And I think that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But if you put the toolkit aside a little bit, just in terms of how we do the work, think about from an attitude perspective. I like to think of what the climate was like during the original Manhattan Project. I mean, clearly a different time in our country. And certainly, there was a different set of drivers that were driving the development of sites like Oak Ridge. But you know, at that time, there was an entirely different risk profile to the work that we did. There was more of a pioneering spirit. I mean, we were literally inventing things as processes as we created what we needed to create. And there was a little more of a willingness to be, I think, almost more experimental in our approach to how we do things, to understanding it doesn't have to be a one solution for a single problem, that we can look at lots of different solutions, organizations working together to solve a number of different processes. So I think a big part of, if you will, almost exporting that model other places is not only the tools themselves and the processes, but kind of the attitude and the risk profile that goes with it.
Thanks. I guess in the spirit of a final question for all of you, you mentioned the Manhattan Project, which it's hard for us to conceive of how they did that, building a reactor in 18 months and all of the things that they did to enable, our national security and our energy future. And Tim and I were talking this morning of how do you think they did that? And I said, probably the simplest thing when you ask the folks at Portsmouth and Paducah and all the sites that were there, the old timers, we just hired all the smart guys, men and women we could from college, brought them in here and turned them loose. And then every day we would refine the problem and they'd just go out and fix it. And at this day and age, one, we've got to recruit and retain those people. And second, half of our workforce has been with us less than 5 years. So we've got the young people, we've got the new people and the fresh minds. So it's kind of a final wrap-up question for all of you. And we'll start, I guess, with you, Joe, is how do we assure that we have a mindset, we as managers, when we talk to our people and we communicate to our people and the stakeholders, that each and every day we're allowing them, encouraging them, rewarding them for thinking creatively and always working more efficiently to get the mission done. You want to start, Joe, with that one?
Yeah, sure. I take this personally. I think I've told many of you, you've seen me talk at E-Tech. I know Tracy's heard it. My career started in environmental cleanup. I graduated from UT, and like many of you, when I was doing my internships, you throw out resumes, and before I knew it, I found that I was working as a civil engineer in nuclear cleanup. I went about my career, and now I'm back in Oak Ridge doing the cleanup work. And so for me, it's very personal. It's very important. It's very meaningful work. And I'm happy to see everything that's going on. That's what I try to talk to with next generation employees, John, and in my organization. They like doing the meaningful work. I encourage them, be creative, find solutions. Let's not kid ourselves. The work we do each and every day is highly regulated, high hazard, very, very complicated work, right? We all know that if you've spent any time in here. And so how do we find problems, or how do we find solutions to those problems? Going through some of the examples that I provided, how can we eliminate some of the requirements while still being safe, still delivering quality products, helping accelerate work, helping reduce costs, because ultimately that's what it's all about. But I also think, John, being here, sharing these lessons learned so that different sites can take it or different industries can take it to various places, to me, that's some of the most important things that we can be doing right now.
Erik, want to go next?
Sure. So, if if you look at people like Steve Jobs, I saw an interview once where Steve Jobs was asked why he was so successful and why Apple was so successful. And he said, really, it's pretty simple. He said, I hire the smartest people on the planet and I stay out of their way. And I very much like that approach. And I've worked with many of you, and it feels like all of you actually, over the years at a lot of different sites. And I have to say, I think at a time in our industry, maybe from a department perspective, we were a little less tolerant of that approach. But I feel like we're very much coming back to it. And what I very much like to do from an Oak Ridge perspective with the federal team is we have a lot of smart people that are really good at solving problems. And we need to give them the tools and the resources they need to be able to do their jobs on a daily basis. But not only the tools and the resources, it's more than just computers and offices and money, obviously. We need to have some tolerance. Part of that process is people growing into their positions and taking ownership of their portfolios. And a big part of that is you have to have a bit of a mistake budget. It's okay for people to stretch and try different things. Not everything is going to work out. So, and again, you have to celebrate the successes, and you have to realize that, you'll get a lot of opportunities to learn ways not to do things as you go through that journey, but that's okay. And so kind of getting back to that mode where people are empowered at all levels of the organization and everyone feels like they're an owner of the process. I don't know if it's mythology. I've read it so many times now that I feel that it's actually true, but I always like the story of when President Kennedy was visiting the Space Center. And supposedly during his tour, he walked over and there was a janitor emptying a wastebasket. And the president said, "Hey, what's your job here?" And the guy could have said, "Well, obviously I'm a janitor." But what he said is, "I'm help sending a man to the moon." And I think that's kind of what we need all throughout the system. I don't think it matters, if you're a Fed, if you're a contractor, where you are in the system as part of our industry, everyone should have that same sense and level of ownership.
Thank you. And Wade, maybe we turn to you next. And I'd say yesterday when I talked with Mayor Gary and Chuck, one of the things we talked about is we as contractors, how do we build the workforce of the future, working with the community? And Chuck said something which is impactful, which we all know, and we do scholarships and we hire these kids from all of the schools, but the idea of how do we get their hearts and minds, in middle school and even grade school, to let them know what a fantastic career it is to work in this industry, because we're going to need these workers, right, to feed both this industry and the new ones. What more can we do as the next step, or what are your thoughts of how do we take this to the next level?
Yeah, I want to take a little bit different approach to that question because it's absolutely the truth. It has to happen. But I want to back up a little bit and talk about what we discussed a little bit in our ECA board meeting yesterday is that EM and cleanup can't happen just for the sake of EM and cleanup anymore. Because of you've heard it spoken of all morning long, that we now find ourselves in a brand new era of this country of, a race for energy dominance, race for AI dominance that could potentially be an existential threat. When Manhattan Project 2.0 in our communities understand what Manhattan Project 1.0 was better than anybody else in the country. So to overcome obstacles like shortages in workforce, getting our kids to understand what great career opportunities are available to them in these fields is not any longer just a matter of capturing opportunity. It's a matter of national security. So this is more than just workforce development. This goes to what Joe and Erik were talking about too, and trying to communicate to our communities how important this is. EM's work is now critical, no pun intended, to the future growth in each of our communities to help achieve this national security imperative. And really, the nuclear renaissance that's going to power our future and help us win that race has to start, and really can only start, in the communities represented in this room. Because we represent really the only nuclear-friendly communities in the country, it has to start with us. It can't end with us because we don't have enough real estate. in our communities to accommodate all the projects that it's going to take in AI data centers, and then the supporting supply chain that it's going to require for these nuclear OEMs to be successful. So that's a big, long answer to say, we have to take a national security approach to reaching our children and letting them know these jobs need to come first. We really need to push our kids into these roles. Yes, we need teachers and doctors and lawyers and policemen and nurses. We need all that, of course. But for us to be successful in this, we need to be telling our kids from kindergarten on, especially in our communities, we need you in these jobs. And here are the pathways. And then working together like we saw in Savannah River this morning and what they've done, and developing programs and opportunities that make very easy pathways into these jobs. I think it's a big holistic approach, but it's going to be taking all of the above, and it's going to take every community in this room to make it happen.
Thank you. Tim, we'll let you finish up.
I would say that don't accept constraints. So a number of times people have talked here at the table today about, Joe in particular, about the importance to understand requirements. Is that a real, like a capital R requirement, regulatory, some kind of a technical requirement? Or is it something that we consider like a small r or like a self-imposed requirement? So there's the opportunities for efficiencies, I think, are huge. A lot of times what I've noticed over my career is we assume that things are in place because they are the most efficient and there is some requirement behind them. And a lot of times they just came up with this compilation of like good ideas, and they're not always the most efficient or the most effective. Maybe they were at the time, and the landscape has changed and they're no longer applicable. So I would offer that we need to continue to interrogate those, ask ourselves the questions to say, is there a better way to do this? Is there a more efficient or effective way to do it? Sure, we need to continue to comply with requirements, but we also need to now turn our focus, like John said from the very beginning, moving from a compliance-based approach to more of an effectiveness and efficiency of mission achievement kind of approach.
Thanks. And, I think that key thing with people and what drives this, we talk about AI replacing jobs, and keep being reminded that you can't automate creative thinking and innovation. We can use it as a tool to learn faster and go faster, but it really takes the best and brightest. Let's turn to, we've got a little time. We understand we are standing between you and lunch, but we do have some time if there are any questions from the audience. So use the microphones if you would, please. We welcome your questions. Seth.
Seth Pershing for ECA. So, and maybe this is a question for Eric, how to go forward. And Eric, you and I have talked about these things in the past. It's really interesting. Everyone always pushes risk-based cleanup as the priority. But what we've seen in Oak Ridge, we also sometimes have to prioritize opportunities. And because Oak Ridge has done such a good job in balancing the two and really focusing on opportunities, now we have an unbelievable amount of opportunities, and we're seeing growth for new nuclear projects. How should we? There we go. How should we kind of be looking at that issue where we're, on one side, on the policy world, we're always saying risk, 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 but the other side, there's opportunities as well, and bringing those two together really has made a success in Oak Ridge. How do we balance the two as we're kind of looking at it from the program? And what would you say to some of the other sites and some of the other managers that are in your position as they're also, approached on that particular issue? And there was a recent GAO report on that as well.
Well, I think it starts with understanding that we can achieve many goals simultaneously. And I think that is what's worked really well at Oak Ridge. I'll use Y-12 as an example. The work we do there, taking down those buildings, and I wish I brought my brick because I just recently gave the deputy secretary a brick from Alpha 2, which we're demolishing, and it's an 81-year-old brick, so it was pretty cool. But Y12 is a good example. A lot of excess facilities, very aged facilities, old, a lot of hazards in those facilities. UCOR has to do a lot of work just in order to get people into those facilities to tear them down. So you take a lot of risk out of the environment, some radiological, but lots of mercury as we get deeper into Y12. But lately, we've been working closer with NNSA at Y12 because their goal is to modernize their campus, right? They have a nuclear weapons enterprise to run, and Y12 figures very heavily in that overall plan. And so they have a lot of work to do in terms of building new facilities or repurposing facilities. And if you've been to Y12, they're somewhat landlocked on the piece of land that they're on. They only have so much space to grow. So the work that Joe's organization is doing, that UCOR is doing in taking down buildings there, actually creates buildable space for Y12. One of the challenges I believe in the past has been, while there have been a lot of opportunities and we've done a lot of good work there, our baselines, if you will, our schedules haven't always been completely aligned in terms of NNSA's mission may have to pivot very quickly, and I completely understand that. I mean, they get new requirements from the Department of Defense or the administration, and so they may have to change the types of things that they're producing and on what schedule. And so we need to be able to pivot somewhat as well, but always understanding as we go through Y12, we're going to be taking down hazardous facilities. We're going to be reducing a lot of the environmental risk that is there. That's good for the workers. That's fantastic for the community, but we can also meet NNSA's needs in the process.
Other questions?
What path is there to go with, say, an elementary or a middle school, to the point of talking to children, the parents, to get them focused on these future jobs? What sort of a curriculum, or how does it staff? What's a good place to see with that?
You know, let me start with that because we've all done a lot of work on that. But you take every institution and like Waste Management and ECA and others, and one thing in American Nuclear Society, we all try to, first of all, it's all of you are the ambassadors to go out to the schools, but you'd say, what do I tell them? How do I start that? So there are these speaker kits available that from all those institutions that will kind of give you the basics that you can use, whether it's view graphs, so that you're not going out there and you can talk about, here's what's really fantastic about the industry, because we all know pieces of it, but the total statistics, and then talk about what that's meant to you and your family and your future as you've gone through it, because that's really the basic, is personalizing it for them. In Nevada, where I live, we get the kids into the museum and for tours, and they say, what do you guys do out at the site? And say, well, you know, we're testing and we do this and we do that. And of course, the first thing is they think it's fantastic because we used to blow things up. And we say, we don't do that anymore, but we work with lasers and we work with all these really cool technologies to detect the bad guys. And they'd say, well, how much money do you make? And I'd say, about 3 times as much as you'd make working in a casino, which, in a hospitality town. So then we've got the idea. So the idea is, what do we do? What's in it for them? And then, well, what school could I go to become a rad tech, in a year or two? So that's that total connection is you going out and talking to the schools. They all want speakers, getting those talking points, and then being able to guide them. Here's what I did. And then here are the schools that you ought to be talking to, as you go through your career. So it's that basic blocking and tackling, but I know all of you would be good at this, but I know the reluctance you have is, well, where do I start and what do I tell them? And be glad to help you. But any of those institutions have used Google, and they've got these basic speaker kits you can use to go get started. Let me turn it over to the other panelists.
John, could I add something? Thanks, Judge, for that question. In Paducah, I think you'll be able to do how we've approached this in Oak Ridge. Because of the successes we've seen, it's gotten people's attention in the community. So with our local school districts, city and 2 county school districts, we've taken teachers from those school districts and taken them to the sites. let, both at the lab, at Y12, at our companies that are in construction projects right now, TVA, and let them see what's happening and to buy in to these opportunities. And if you get your teachers bought in, then it's culture change. So your systems start to buy in and start looking for ways to create pathways as far back into the school system as you can get it. And like I said, kindergarten, yeah, that may be a bit of a stretch, but certainly middle school. And to get, again, in being in nuclear friendly communities, to get our kids accepting of the nuclear world and nuclear related careers. I think what the approach John talked about, this approach, I think it fits the community. Your own community has to figure out what it looks like for yourself. But you've got to be very intentional, very deliberate, and then start pulling in that direction to get in my opinion, teachers first, and then create that culture where they're building into the kids this acceptance of nuclear. And the downside to that is that the teachers buy in so much that they want to get out of teaching and they will go into careers in nuclear. Yeah, I had a principal. Don't tell my school system this. I had a principal stop me last week and say, "Hey, I only want to do this a couple more years. You think you can help me get in a job at one of these places?"
You want me to? I would say just to add to all those viewpoints, it's really the people as well. And I love talking about the work and explaining the work that we do, but the people that do these jobs, all of you, I mean, you're incredible. You have the most incredible stories and the most incredible experiences. Oak Ridge is blessed with one of the most amazing historians that I think I've ever met. I love him, but I hate speaking afterwards, right after him, because I'm always looking at him while I'm speaking because I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong, because he is so steeped in the history of Oak Ridge and K-25, but he doesn't try to teach about as much the process and the mechanics of it and building numbers, things people probably won't retain. He tells these amazing stories of what it was like to work in a production environment and what the national atmosphere was and what was happening in the community of Oak Ridge at the time. And it's captivating to hear him speak. And I think we need more of that passion of putting the people that do these jobs in front of the people that will be doing these jobs next.
John, I'll just quickly say it's a great question. I think the times have changed a lot where organizations such as UCOR, corporations, we would focus a lot on and put a lot of our calories at colleges, right, with recruitment. That's not the case anymore. It goes way, way further back than that now. And that's where our focus is as part of our overarching workforce development program. We're out in schools, elementary schools, working with them, doing projects, having field trips, bringing them onto sites. Because, I mean, let's keep in mind, I've got a 13-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old daughter. They're already talking now at that age, middle school, what they already want to do, right? So if you've waited till high school or you're waiting till college to have these conversations, you're late to the game. And so that's what we've started doing. And I think John's point, Wade's points are all spot on. We've got to get to them early and show them the benefits. And let's keep in mind too, there's a lot of different paths that they can take through that. There's a lot of different opportunities, a lot of different professions that make up. It's not just engineers, right? It's safety, it's applied technology, it's welders, it's operators, it's laborers, it's technicians and things like that. We cover the full spectrum across our industry. And so having those conversations, letting people know there's decades of work in this particular hometown, there's a lot of money to be made, there's meaningful work. Those are the conversations that we're having, but it's a great question. You got to get in early.
And thank you for the question. Tim, you may want to add to this as well. But for WM, and first, I hope you all attend this year. Recall that's a nonprofit. All the money we make from that conference goes to education and scholarships. And Susan Steiger and Gary Benda and others are here. And they put a lot of energy over almost the last decade putting together those kind of kits. And at least that's a starting point for what they've done successfully.
Anything, is that a question?
Another question? Okay. as we move towards a more aggressive approach to the cleanup schedule, to completing mission, and we're also streamlining requirements, how do we maintain or rebuild our relationship with our surrounding communities when incidents do occur or when DOE operations have to pivot for mission or schedule or as changes occur?
Do you want to?
Another great question, right? It goes back, Eric's talked a lot about it. We talk a lot about it. In fact, it's one of the fundamental elements of UCOR, what we like to call shared governance. You know, it's a term that Ken Reuter, my president and CEO, uses a lot. It's truly bringing everyone together because you're spot on. And I think Wade even talked about it a little bit. Without one of the pillars, someone's getting left behind. And so the way we look at it is shared equity in the outcomes, decision-making that involves everybody's input. And so you can't do this in a vacuum. You can't do it in a silo because at the end of the day, somebody will get left out and you're not going to see the positive progress you would have otherwise. And so within UCOR, I think certainly the partnership we have EM, that's a shared belief that we have. And certainly with the communities, whether it's the cities, whether it's the counties, whether it's the state, whether it's the regulators, whether it's university consortiums and other partners like that, we want everybody all in it together.
Okay, just one thing to that is it's the front end work. If you wait until something happens to work on whatever the issue is, it's too late. You've got to invest in those relationships constantly, continually before there's something that happens. Things are going to happen. It's inevitable. But if the quality of your relationships is going to determine how well you work through the issues together. So, I mean, it's very intentional. It's work. That's one of the themes across this panel is that relationships are work. You've got to be committed to them on both sides or all angles. And that's exactly how you work through any issues that occur.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you all. As we wrap up, I guess I'd like to thank you all for being here and giving us a chance to brag a little bit on what are we doing in Oak Ridge. We say that while recognizing the fantastic things that you're doing at Idaho. I mean, not just in cleanup, but in enabling the nuclear renaissance with testing 18 to 20 reactors. I mean, who would have thought a couple years you could do that? How creatively? Savannah River, Hanford, every one of those sites, Pantex, Y12, Los Alamos, Kansas City, Livermore, you've all got some great innovations underway. We're kind of focused and nose to the grindstone on doing our cleanup. If you have any things that we can learn from, one, we'll share with you. We would love to hear what's working for you so that we can implement it because, as we said, not only is this important to a community, but as the broader EM and DOE community, we want to learn from you. So thank you for being here. I want to thank and I'm honored to be with this panel. What a great group of individuals. And you look at the progress that we have made across the complex and think of where we could be in 5 years. It's a pretty exciting future for us and for all the bright men and women that we bring in. So thank you all. We are adjourned. Enjoy lunch. We'll reconvene this afternoon.